Hello and welcome to the inaugural episode of the Primarch's Playbook. Now, this series is going to all be about Codex Space Marines. So that is the vanilla Space Marine chapters, those that are Codex compliant, that keep with the generalist units that are laid down in the Codex Astartes by Rabute Guilliman. So this one is going to take a little bit different to some of the other content you've seen me on before, as you might usually know me as Dark Angels, Toby. But now we're going with the compliant chapters, so courage and honor and all that fun stuff. So you're going to be expecting lots of blue armor, bit of yellow armor, some green armor. Green armor for Salamander, so light green armor. Possibly some black armor in the guise of the Raven Guard, not Ravenwing. Not the Ravenwing, not this series. And we're going to talk all about how you can make your Codex Space Marines as competitive as possible, making sure that we're looking at different units that vary from how the Divergent chapters are being successful. Now, this series might be coming at quite an interesting time because we know that we're about to get a large rework of the Codex Space Marines. We know that there's a lot of issues with it at the moment. There's problems with the non-Codex compliant chapters like Dark Angels and Space Wolves just creaming off the top units and then putting the units that the compliant chapters don't have access to in, things like Deathwing Knights, or possibly some of the named characters like Bjorn the Fell-Handed for Space Wolves, or even going as far as for things like Sanguinary Guard and Dante in Blood Angels. So we're going to break it down and we're going to try and make sure that we take those big fans of behaving by the Codex, get the best chance that they can to win. So without further ado, we're going to jump into why playing Codex Marines is a good idea. Now, the reason to play Codex Marines a lot of the time is actually very similar to why you might play Divergent, and that's the characters. So you might remember right at the start of 10th edition, most of the Space Marine chapters were played as Black Templars, just so they had the Melters, or they were played as, say, Dark Angels, so they had access to Azrael, or they were played as Ultramarines, so they had access to Marneus Calgar. Now, there is one very large and very good reason. Marneus Calgar is incredibly strong, and a lot of the other Codex Marines characters are incredibly powerful, and you only have access to them in the compliant chapters. So that does lock off some options for some more flexible units. However, a lot of the time those units can be strong enough on their own that they can elevate the Codex Space Marine units to that next level, because a lot of the times they are pretty cheap, and they've got quite strong abilities, but they just haven't had their opportunity in the sun because everyone's too busy looking at models like Azrael, Dante, etc., etc. Now, something else that's really nice about Codex Space Marines is the way that they've set up what these characters can lead. So there is better usage of these led units. So a really good example of this is Company Heroes. Now, Azrael, for example, can't lead Company Heroes, which is really sad. However, Marneus Calgar can lead Company Heroes. And the major thing there is that Azrael gives them that 4-up invulnerable save. Marneus Calgar gives them Victrix Honor Guard, which has 2 extra models with a 4-up invulnerable save. And they're all keeping that -1 to wound, and you can allocate that as you wish, that damage, so you can make sure that you're saving on those 4s. And that's just going to give that unit a little bit more punch. But Marneus Calgar with a -1 to wound is an incredibly good example. Similarly, you can also get someone like Uriel Ventris in a Company Heroes squad, or you can look at getting Lieutenant Titus, which is one of the new models. We've only just got his data sheet, but you can get him with, say, Hellblasters for a really nasty shooting threat, or you could put him with something like Assault Intercessors or Blade Guard for a very efficient combat threat. Now, one of the major reasons to play Codex Space Marines is Rabute Guilliman. I nearly called him Gorilla Man. There's so many different names. Girly Man, Gorilla Man. I can't think of any more off the top of my head, but there's so many silly ones. But Rabute is in fact pretty damn strong now. So he's gone from 350 points to 285 in the latest slate. That's utterly bonkers to me. And as someone that usually plays with the Lion, like looking at his combat profiles, I'm like, okay, this guy is nuts. And the fact that he can stand up and has good Primarch abilities, I think he's incredible. We're going to touch on more on him later because he's such a good reason to play Codex Space Marines. But I just wanted to mention him right at the start of the video. Now, another good reason to play Codex Space Marines is they're often underestimated by opponents. Now, because Space Marines tends to be people's first army, or everyone owns a Space Marine army is an adage that you'll often hear, Codex Space Marines is often viewed somewhat negatively in terms of, oh, well, they might be a little bit of an easier opponent, they might not know what they're doing so much, all that kind of thing, which plays into your wheelhouse. Play that advantage. If you are underestimated, even better. You want your opponent to not go in going, this is going to be the toughest game I'm ever going to have, or thinking, oh, I've got nothing to lose. If you get them in that mindset that they are underestimating you, there is a higher chance that be able to pull the rug out from out and under them, panic them, and then push. So, underestimated by opponents, don't underestimate them underestimating you. How many times can I say underestimated in a single sentence? So Codex Space Marines has that little advantage. It's a bit of a weird advantage there, and it's more of a mental advantage. It goes back to kind of those Jedi mind tricks that you can use at competitive games, and I really like it. I think, you know, let the opponent have their assumptions. It's great. It's a fantastic way that you can still build an advantage and still play in the correct way just by letting someone use their own internal biases. So let's jump into the Primarch himself. Now, 285 points as we've already discussed. His options is that he can do a double Oath of Moment, pretty damn good. He can free strat to a unit within 12, and he can increase in an aura of 6 inches a unit by OC1, and they get to reroll Battle Shock. Now, OC is already really good, and I like all of his abilities are so good compared to, say, the Lion, who just goes, I've got a 4-up Feel No Pain to mortals. Yay. And that's it. But then we get into actually Rabute himself and how good he is in combat. With his strike attack, he's strength 14, I believe. 7 attacks, -4, dev wounds, flat 4 damage, which is already pretty damn good. And then his sweep attack is 2 damage a pop. So that is just cutting through Legionnaires or similar. So really, Rabute is where you want to be in terms of both combat and in terms of his abilities to buff the rest of your army. Now, if your opponent does manage to get to him and kill him, on a 2-up, he stands back up on 6 wounds. Now, that ain't bad. And the fact that you can, anything that reanimates is positive. We're seeing it with things like Fabius Bile and obviously Necrons, all that kind of, those kinds of characters. But having a 285 point model jump back up, I know it's not as good as Angron, but it's still incredibly powerful because conversely to Angron, he both breaches and has lone op if he's within 3 inches of another Ultramarines unit. So Rabute, like, don't sleep on this guy. He's incredibly powerful. Not only will he ruin people in combat, he doesn't even need to have that much of a combat presence. He can just buff the rest of your army the entire time. And because he's buffing your entire army and just being a solid, hard-to-kill lone op, it's also going to force your opponent to try and deal with him, which will put them into difficult positions where then you can push them into positions they don't want to be and ultimately win the game. Because also, if they do manage to kill him, he's probably going to get up. And that kind of thing is just going to edge you ahead and push those games where it's tight, and particularly when it is very difficult in those in the top table games. This will give you the ability to just push to that next level and get around those sort of slightly stickier moments, because you don't have to be as aggressive with Rabute. You can be, but you can play incredibly passively with him and keep your resources back, because he both breaches, has lone op, and he also can buff your army while not being in combat. So that's the Primarch himself, and I'm really high on him. Like, he was 350 points. He's gone to 285. Anything that has a points drop like that is worth a look, because there is a reason that they first thought that that model should be 350. They've gone, cool, we got this wrong. But then dropping that like percentage of their points is utterly crazy. Usually, like, big changes like that don't happen. We don't see mass changes. Usually it's in increments of 5, 10, maybe 20, but 350 to 285, that's a hell of a spicy change. So yeah, Rabute, I think, is back, and he's back until, well, unless he gets a rewrite. But he at 285 points, I personally think is a bargain. And I think he is probably the reason to play Codex Space Marines right now. There are some others, and that kind of segues us nicely onto the next section, where we're going to talk about the best characters available. Now, you're going to notice that all of the characters that we've discussed so far are Ultramarines. And that is somewhat limiting to what sort of Codex compliant army you can build, because you might be going, well, I'm a massive fan of Imperial Fists. And yes, absolutely fine. Imperial Fists are great. I love their Lysander and Torgaradon. However, this is going to focus on getting the most competitive result out of your army. And if you are just playing Codex Space Marines, I would really advise, even if they're painted as, the most beautiful Raven Guard in the world, or the most ugly Imperial Fists in the world, because I'll be honest, I suck at painting. If you just slap some paint on there and say, yep, let's go, fantastic, proud of you. But play them as Ultramarines, because you're still playing as Astartes. There isn't really much difference. It's just a couple of different characters. So, Ultramarines characters. So, Lieutenant Titus, who has just come out, the wonderful character from the game Space Marine and Space Marine 2, originally voiced by Mark Strong, which really surprised me. Like, hearing that the first time, I was like, what? Is that really him? But he is actually a complete beast. So he gives sustained to the unit he's leading. He himself has a 2-up innate fight on death. And then he has 8 attacks, just standard chainsword, but they're anti-infantry too. So he is going to chop through screens like there is no problem. Like, he will just trade so efficiently because he's 70 points. He's incredibly cheap for what he does. He also has a 5-up Feel No Pain, so he doesn't have an invulnerable save. But because he's got that 5-up Feel No Pain, he survives longer than he should. He's a really powerful little model, and with that fight on death, it's going to force your opponent to deal with him, usually with something that's higher pointed. It will draw something out of position. So my preferred method at the moment, I think, would be Lieutenant Titus. I'm going to call him Lieutenant or Lieutenant. Either one works. Lieutenant Titus in Assault Intercessors, and you just go in and deal with screens, and you just kill those screens off. And then if you're playing Gladius, which you probably should be, then you've got your reactive move available, all that kind of stuff, just to keep that cheap unit going a little bit longer, being a bit of a thorn in your opponent's side, and also probably denying them primary and board position, all for the low price of 145 points, which I think is a pretty damn good bargain. Yes, potentially that will give up Assassinate at times, but I think the pros outweigh the cons in there. Now, going on to the next character, it's going to be Uriel Ventress. Now, this one actually is a book character. If you've not read those books, phenomenal. The first book is really cool. The second one, even cooler, beating up on some Tyranids. And then the third one is just so dark. Like, I don't know what the author did, but like Graham McNeil's the fantastic author. But it goes from just this lovely series of just like, yeah, badass Ultramarines. Oh, cool, he's in Deathwatch armor now. How cool is that? To suddenly, oh god, they're on the home of the Iron Warriors. It gets real dark real quick. But fantastic book series. Really, really enjoyed it. And luckily, we got Uriel himself in model form, and my god, he did not disappoint. Now, Uriel is captain of the fleet, master of the fleet, I think it is, in the lore, and that means that he just gets to point at a unit when you're setting your army up and go, you've got Deep Strike now. And that is pretty damn game-breaking. Well, not breaking, but it's pretty damn good. So you'd have probably seen this quite a lot in the Vanguard detachments with the 6 blob of Centurion Devastators, picking up, redeploying, all that kind of stuff with Deep Strike, making them super powerful. Now, the Gladius lists are likely to go with something more like Eradicators with the Harm Assist. Harm Assist is a apothecary biologist with fire discipline. And it just gives that flexibility that you go, right, I can put these in reserve. They can jump down, they can rapid ingress, then there'll be a melter range if you're against a Catan spam or something like that. And it just elevates your ability to deal with your opponent and get into those positions that causes them a massive pain in the backside. Similarly, what you could do is you could have a Judicia with 6 Blade Guard, and you could rapid ingress them just as your, say, World Eater opponent is about to charge you, and then you can heroically intervene with your Fights First unit. So there's a lot of sort of breadth that Uriel gives you. And again, for 75 points, he is so cheap. But that's not even the best of it. Suddenly, Uriel, because his rules used to be related to like free stratting some name strats, and then the rules changed, so it just didn't work. He was given a Vectora. And that's pretty damn good. It does mean that he's going to be a little bit more of a frontline hero, possibly sort of chilling around the centre walls, usually behind them, because I don't think he wants to get too spicy. But if he needs to, he's pretty damn good in combat. The best way to bring him is probably with company heroes. You can bring him on its own. It's a risk. It's possible if you really need to keep your army as lean as possible on points, but I would really advise taking company heroes because that unit punches up, and again, that -1 to wound, just super powerful because it's not just -1 to wound if they're higher, it's just -1 to wound. So if they're hitting you with strength 4, they're, bolters, suddenly are wounding them on 5s, and their lack of invuln is kind of, it's not ideal, but it's a little bit evened out because of that flat -1 to wound. And they've got 4 wounds. They're pretty chunky. They're difficult to get through. And being 2 OC just helps you out that little bit extra. And then between Uriel and the company champion, there's 2 really good swords in there that can chop through most elite infantry. So finally, in sort of those S-tier characters, we've already mentioned him, and that is Marnius Calgard, the chapter master of the Ultramarines. For 185 points, he better do some good stuff, but he really does. He gives extra CP. He is brutal in combat. His fists are both twin-linked and damage 3. Like, they punch hard. And his shooting's not bad either. Brings along his 2 buddies, and because they've got a 4-up invuln, hey, that works really nicely with company heroes. And then he also happens to give advance, charge, and shoot. So we've seen so many times that Advance X is just a very powerful ability, and especially pairing that with something like Gladius, where you can go, cool, he's going to be advancing and charging this turn while the rest of my army's in the tactical doctrine. It just gives you that little bit of flexibility where often you might consider spending the CP on squad tactics. Yeah, no, is it squad tactics? Can't remember if that's the reactive move or to put them in the different doctrine. It's one of the 2. But if you use the stratagem to put them in the different doctrine, then, that's costing you a CP. But Marnius, you don't need to do that because he's already got those innate abilities, which is really, really quite helpful. And if you're not convinced, just watch him punch something. It will usually be dead pretty damn quickly. Now, because I didn't want to make this a complete jerk-off fest for the Ultramarines, we're going to talk about some other characters. So let's stay on 3 damage, and that's Adrax Agatone from the Salamanders. So he has a massive hammer called Malleum Noctus, or Noctus Malleum, either one. Fucking badass name. I think that's Night Hammer in Latin. So very, very cool. And it's a 3 damage strength 10 Thunder Hammer. So bonk. It's going to kill most elite infantry. It's going to go through most sort of medium to light tanks. And he's also re-rolling wounds. And he gives his squad reroll wounds too. So he's rather tasty. The ability to just sort of push up, do a hell of a lot of damage, reroll those wounds, and you can put that with, I guess something like Blade Guard. There's options there on what you want to put him with. I guess you don't want to put him with Assault Intercessors just because they already reroll wounds innately. But Adrax, I really like. I think he's got a hell of a powerful ability. And at like 75 or 85 points, one of the 2, he's just pretty nicely costed. I think he's powerful. That Strength 10 hammer is going to deal with things pretty efficiently, and that Flamer's not bad either. So Adrax Agatone, he's made the list of sort of those strong characters. Now, obviously, we can't stop jerking off to the Ultramarines, so we're back to Cato Sicarius. So I really like Kato because reactive moves are one hell of a drug. And giving Scout and Assault, again, we've already discussed how Advance X is good. Scout 6 just lets you get into those sort of slightly difficult positions. It allows you to threaten the potential for early charges, especially when you're playing things like Gladius where you've got access to advance and charge. And Kato's not bad in combat. He's also on a 25mm base, which is quite handy for if you are playing on UKTC terrain, going through walls if your opponent is trying to screen you off with 1 inch. If you want to look at the maths for that, I'm going to point you to my friend who's a maths teacher. He did a beautiful little diagram. I had no idea what it meant, but it did prove the point that you can do it. But yeah, Kato, real good. And just being able to reactive move every turn, that surprised me, because if you look at something like Huron Blackheart, his is once per game. Kato's is once a turn. So I like Kato. Then finally we're going to talk about Kaven Shrike, and that is purely because he is incredibly flexible. Because he himself is a lone op, or he gives the unit that he is with lone op, and he's also a bit of a character sniper. He's also going 12 inches, so he can fill that role of either killing off characters, being a good action piece because he goes 12 inches, breaches, and he's a lone op. Or he can just kill screens. And also, I believe he is the character where you can pick him and his unit up if they're not in engagement range at the end of turn, and then redeploy them, so they can get around the board really easily. And that just adds a lot to your flexibility and your ability to sort of get into these tight positions and deal with your opponent's problem areas as quickly as possible. Now, I don't think Shrike is a reason to play Raven Guard, and that is where Codex Marines does fall down, because you can't have, say, Kaven Shrike turn up in an Ultramarines army or Adrax turn up in an Iron Hands army, which is a shame, because it does mean that characters like Kaven Shrike and probably Adrax end up on the shelf. And it favours Ultramarines, which is a real shame in some ways, because I mean, I personally love the Salamanders. I would love to see them on the table more, but it's just not really going to happen at that top level of tournament play, because they're locked out of things like Rabute, or they're locked out of Uriel. So yeah, but there's 3 really strong characters. And I really like Shrike. I think he's got some real play to him. So if you're playing Raven Guard, sound off below how you're finding him. I think he is the reason to play Raven Guard if you are playing Raven Guard. So yeah, bit of Kaven Shrike, Kato Sicarius, and Atrax Agatone. Now, Saving Grace. So this is, I've called this Saving Grace because it's kind of that, oh, I don't have access to Deathwing Knights because I'm playing Codex Space Marines. Oh, I don't have access to Sanguinary Guard, etc., etc., etc. And I think there's some units that are a bit of a saving grace to that. So we've already talked about this one quite a lot, and that is Company Heroes. Very flexible, -1 to wound when led, 2 OC, good in combat. They've got a precision sword, because why not, right? The champion can just challenge someone and beat the crap out of them. And they've just got access to some weird, cool guns that have like sustained 2 dev wound heavy bolter. Actually, I can't remember if the heavy bolter's dev wound. I think that might be Stern Guard. But the heavy bolter is, I think, oh yeah, the heavy bolter is 3 damage, which can be really nice. Like, it's only strength 5, but sometimes it punches up. I killed a Doomstalker with it before. And then you've also got a dev wounds bolt rifle. That was the one that I forgot and confused with the heavy bolter. But yeah, 2 damage, dev wounds, mastercrafted, assault bolter, or whatever they're called, bolt rifle. So there's lots of different pieces that make Company Heroes just quite good. Then we are in a vehicle meta at the moment, or at least we are very firmly heading towards a vehicle meta. So shockingly, we're going to talk about 3 vehicles, and that is the Vindicator, the Whirlwind, and the Ballistus. Vindicator, we know it has so much damage potential. It can one-shot Catans, it can deal with so much so easily, and the threat of it is enough to force your opponent to play around it. So even though it might low roll and might do absolutely atrociously, your opponent has to respect it. And that is a major bonus for you, because your opponent can't just disrespect the Vindicator, because sometimes you high roll and sometimes you just blow their face off. So Vindicator, very impressed with that. Whirlwind, again, I think the number is 3. If you want to play Whirlwinds, play 3 of them. Oath your opponent. Oath the unit, particularly with Rebooter, where you can double oath. You can oath one thing, triple Whirlwind it to death, oath another thing, and deal with that with your infantry. I really like them. I think that they're not very interactive. It might not be the way that you like to play. That's also absolutely fine. But because they've also got a 72-inch Vengeance launcher or whatever it's called, you can just go direct. Like, you can just move them so that they can then see your opponent from a long line and just blow them to pieces. That's probably particularly good on Mission 5 of UKTC, where that board is sort of ridiculously wide open. I'm not a huge fan of that board, but I would say that I play a combat army. But yeah, that would make the Whirlwind even better. And then speaking of long range and just efficient ballistas, the ballistas dreadnought, I've got 2 literally right next to me because I've just got my 2nd and 3rd. They're 130 points. They're a dreadnought chassis, so 2-up save, T10, 12 wounds. They're hard to kill. And now at 130 points with that, with the 2 shots from the las cannons and the 2 shots from the crack missiles, with innate rerolls, they're pretty good at killing off your opponent's tanks. I really like that. I probably could have included the Predator Destructor here as well. That's definitely part of this conversation. Again, 130 point tank. It's competing with the ballistas right now. I'm not sure which one is better. It's going to take more testing. I am testing lists with both 3 ballistas and lists with 3 Predator Destructors. At the moment, I'm falling more towards ballistas, but that might be more my play style. So just have a play around, see which works best for you. And don't just trust that, yeah, Ballistas is definitely better than Predator Destructor, because they've both got massive bonus points, and in certain metas, the Predator Destructor will be extremely better than the Ballistas. So if you're in like a Terminator meta of 3 wound elite infantry, then you grab that Predator Destructor and you ride that autocannon to victory. Okay, so here's an example list. So it's kind of what you'd expect, right? It's just a lot of the best units. Reboote, Titus with 6 Blade Guard, because I love them going all choppy. Calgar with Company Heroes, because, as we've already discussed, Ventress with Company Heroes, we've already discussed it. Harm Assist with 6 Eradicators, because, oh my god, they're so good. They just delete anything they see. And now you can oath one thing with them, Reboote the other thing, and bang, off it goes. So yeah, Harm Assist with 6 Eradicators. Impulsor, which is where you just put Titus and his Blade Guard buddies. 3 Ballistas Dreadnoughts, because we like some long-range Dakka. Infiltrators to screen your home objective. And 2 Scouts, because never leave home without Scouts. They're really, really good. You can scout jail people, and it's really funny. So yeah, keep Scouts in. They're still amazing. There is a reason that every single Space Marine list takes them. Having keyword Infiltrate and Scout, great. So, let's talk about another example list, and that's actually Salamanders this time. So we got Adrax with Company Heroes, we got an Ancient with Intercessors, because I had 50 spare points, a Harm Assist with 6 Eradicators. By the way, this is Gladius. I'm sorry, Gladius is the best for Codex Space Marines. There's just no 2 ways about it. You can play Vanguard, but I would really advise sticking with Gladius. So Harm Assist with 6 Eradicators, Vulcan Heastan with Company Heroes. Just again, they're a pretty durable unit. I'm not sold on Vulcan, but I kind of like him. JPIs, because Jump Pack Intercessors are still pretty damn efficient. Triple Ballistas, who'd have thought? But you could just say Triple Predator Destructor if you wanted. A Repulsor, because then we have the Harm Assist with the 6 Eradicators, jumping out, shooting. Say your opponent's playing a Catan spam list. They have 2 Catan coming down. The Repulsor goes forward. Out jump your Harm Assist with 6 Eradicators. Pick up a Catan. The other Catan comes closer. You overwatch it. And as it charges you, you jump back in the Repulsor. It has to charge the Repulsor. If it's the Nightbringer, it will probably pick up the Repulsor. If it's the Void Dragon, yeah, probably. But something like a Transcendent will not pick up. Well, it could, but it probably won't pick up a Repulsor. Then we've got Triple Scouts, because Triple Scouts are great. And then Triple Vindicators, because we like to go boom. Now this list, I think, would potentially struggle with infantry spam, but if you do take something like this and you come up against infantry spam, look at where your opponent can leave the deployment zone easily, put the scouts in front of it, use those 15 infiltrating models just to screen them out of going anywhere relevant, and then just use the rest of the army as efficiently as possible with either the frag missiles, the demolisher cannons, the combat between Adrax and Vulcan. There's so many different options. And then you've got that lovely ancient with the intercessors just chilling, causing problems for your opponents alongside those JPIs. Okay, so final thoughts on Codex Space Marines. I think they're still strong. Realistically, Ultramarines are the flat best. It is what it is. They've got access to most of the characters. Those characters are really good at the moment. Do not sleep on them. If you are playing Codex Space Marines, really do consider Ultramarines. There is a massive rework coming, so in a week's time, 2 weeks' time, this video might be absolutely useless. So sorry, but we will be doing more videos on this if you enjoy the content. Gladius, I would say, is still very much king. It's the best attachment that's accessible. You can play Vanguard, you can play Stormlance. I wouldn't, but there are options to do it. And I think the nice thing for Codex Space Marines is they're an aggressive army. They want to get up, they want to go, right, can you deal with, say, triple Ballistus, triple Vindicator, and they're going to try and punch you in the face. Like, I love that aggression. And then they're like, well, if you can't deal with all of these vehicles, by the way, there's still company heroes coming for you with those bonkers characters, and they're -1 to wound the whole time. There's definitely play here, and I think the fact that we saw Josh Roberts playing Ultramarines at Leicester proves that point. I really think that there is something in Codex Space Marines. Obviously, that massive rework might change things, hopefully for the better, but, you know, do not sleep on Codex Space Marines. So, thank you so much for watching. Really appreciate it. This has been the first episode of Primarch's Playbook, so I do hope you've liked it. Let me know what you did like. Let me know what you didn't like. I will be continuing to do this as long as people enjoy it. Thank you so much to our sponsors, Glasshammer Gaming. So you can use the code Black Crow and you get 5% off at checkout. Or you can go to Terrain Forge, get some lovely terrain. Use the code BCG5 for another 5% off at checkout there too. You can follow this content. You can give it a like. You can go follow us on social media and all that kind of good stuff. Come up to us at tournaments. You'll see our shirts. If you're going to the ICT in February, there I think is 50 of us going. So come along, say hello. It's going to be a really good time. So yeah, I hope you've enjoyed this first episode of the Primarch's Playbook and Codex Space Marines, and I look forward to seeing you soon. Thank you so much for watching. Courage and honor!